In 465 BCE, a woman got dragged into the courtyard of the most magnificent palace that ever existed on this earth. What came next was so brutal, so utterly horrible, that even the soldiers who witnessed it, men hardened by war and violence, they couldn't speak about it without shaking. Their trembling wasn't weakness. It was the weight of what they'd seen. Her only crime was this: she said no to the wrong person. But what makes this whole thing truly horrifying isn't just one act of cruelty. It wasn't an isolated moment of violence. This was just one day in the Persian royal court. Just one crime in a pattern that stretched across decades. A decaying system that turned the world's most beautiful palace into something else entirely. A place of psychological torture. And the man responsible? You know his name. You've seen his armies in movies. Watched them come across the screen in dramatic battle scenes. But you have absolutely no idea what he really was, who he actually turned into behind closed doors. History has decided to remember King Xerxes I of Persia in a very specific way. As a warrior. As the man who led millions of soldiers against Greece. As the builder of monuments that seemed to defy human imagination. That's the story we tell ourselves, because it's easier to accept, easier to understand, easier to digest. But what if I told you something different? What if behind those golden walls, inside that empire, a completely different kind of war was happening? A war with no swords and no shields. A war where the victims couldn't run away, couldn't fight back, and couldn't even tell the truth about what was being done to them without putting everything they loved at risk, everyone they cared about? What if the greatest atrocity of Xerxes' entire reign had absolutely nothing to do with Greece or any battlefield? What if the worst things were happening right inside his own roof every single day? What if the people suffering the most were the ones who should have been safest in his presence? I need you to stay with me on this, because what you're about to learn is going to change everything you thought you knew about ancient Persia. By the time this is over, you'll understand why this particular story was buried, why it was hidden and forgotten for more than 2,000 years. Let's start with a question that most historians are afraid to ask. What does it actually do to someone, to a human being, when absolutely everyone around them insists that they're not human at all? When society, the entire structure around you, says you're something else, something higher, something divine? October 486 BCE, we're in the throne room at Persepolis. A man who is 36 years old, a guy named Xerxes, he's about to receive the crown. Not just any crown. The crown of the largest empire the world has ever seen. His father, Darius the Great, is gone now, dead. And from this single moment forward, from the second Xerxes puts on that crown, he will never experience another genuine human interaction for the rest of his life. Think about that for a second. Let that sink in. Every single person who approaches him, every courtier, every nobleman, every servant, every member of his own family, they all have to follow this elaborate ritual called proskynesis. They fall face down on the ground. They kiss the earth in front of him. It's not a bow. It's not kneeling. It's complete prostration, the kind you do before a god, not a king. The kind of submission you only show to something divine. No one can turn their back to him. Ever. If you turn around, if you show him your back, that's a death sentence. No one can look directly into his eyes unless he specifically gives them permission to do so. No one can speak unless he speaks to them first. You have to wait to be spoken to. The Greek historian Herodotus recorded something truly chilling about how the Persian court actually worked, about the rules that governed everything that happened there. If you needed to deliver urgent news to the king, if something serious was happening, something that demanded his immediate attention, you still had to stand outside the throne room. You'd wait there, for days, sometimes for weeks. You waited for permission to come in. And this wasn't some minor inconvenience. Even if the empire itself was burning, even if cities were falling to enemies, even if the whole thing was collapsing, you waited. Because interrupting the god king at the wrong moment could cost you your head. It could cost you your life. But here's what makes this truly insidious. What really gets under your skin when you think about it. Xerxes wasn't born into this belief. He didn't just naturally grow up believing he was divine. He was systematically conditioned into it. It was done to him deliberately. His mother, Atossa, she understood power better than anyone else who was alive at that time. She was the daughter of Cyrus the Great, the founder of the entire empire. And she'd witnessed something that shaped her completely. She'd watched her own family completely tear itself apart in wars over who would inherit the throne. She'd seen brothers poison other brothers. She'd seen entire bloodlines, whole families, erased overnight like they never existed. And from all of that, from everything she'd seen, she knew one brutal, ugly truth. In the Persian court, in that world, family wasn't something that gave you love or protection. Family was the most dangerous threat of all. So she raised her son with one lesson. One thing she drilled into him from childhood. Trust nothing. Control everything. Show no weakness. Because the moment you're perceived as human, the moment someone sees you as vulnerable, sees you as capable of doubt or fear or hesitation, you're already dead. Someone will kill you. The Greek sources, the writings that survived, they tell us that Atossa had an enormous amount of influence over her son Xerxes. More influence than any general had, more than any father figure or advisor. And what she created, what she molded and shaped, wasn't just a king. She created something far more dangerous than that. She created a man who genuinely believed, down in his core, that other human beings existed for only one purpose, to serve his will. They were extensions of himself. Now let's talk about where all of this played out. The place where this all happened. The royal household itself. Hollywood gets this completely wrong. Spectacularly wrong. When most people picture ancient Persian kings, they imagine something like an eternal party. Hundreds of wives. Endless pleasure. A fantasy of complete indulgence without any limits. But the reality was far more complicated than that, and in many ways, far more disturbing. The Persian royal household, they called it the Andarion, and it was actually a sophisticated political institution. It wasn't what Western people usually imagine. And contrary to what most people think, Xerxes appears to have been married to only one woman his entire adult life. Her name was Queen Amestris. Think about what that actually means. This wasn't some kind of disposable harem where the women were interchangeable and could be ignored. His wife wasn't someone he could just forget about. She was a permanent fixture in his life, a woman of enormous power in her own right. She owned vast estates. She commanded her own household troops. She held official audiences with foreign dignitaries. Ancient records actually show that she even controlled major construction projects across the entire empire. She had real authority. But here's the thing that makes this entire system so twisted, so psychologically messed up. All of that power, every bit of it, existed only because Xerxes allowed it. It was all at his pleasure. With a single word, with one command, he could take it all away. He could strip her of everything. The royal household was home to the most powerful women in the entire empire. The king's mother, his wife, his sisters, his daughters, the wives and daughters of his closest relatives and most trusted nobles. These women lived in unimaginable luxury. They wore robes that were worth more than entire cities. They dined on delicacies that came from every corner of the known world. They were attended by hundreds of servants whose only job was to fulfill their wishes, to give them whatever they wanted. But they were also prisoners, locked away. The Greek physician Ctesias, who served at the Persian court many decades after Xerxes died, he left us descriptions of the royal household. And the way he describes it, it sounds like something from a nightmare. The women's quarters were sealed off from the outside world. There were massive walls surrounding them, and locked gates. Male visitors were completely forbidden. No men allowed inside except for the king himself and a small number of eunuchs. Men who'd been castrated specifically so they could serve in the Androon without posing any kind of threat. The women could look out from high windows. They could see the city below. They could see life happening out there. They could hear sounds of normal people living normal lives beyond those walls. But they couldn't leave. They couldn't participate in any of it. They had everything except the one thing that matters the most, the one thing you can't live without: agency, control over their own existence, the ability to make decisions about their own lives. And here's what's even more horrifying than that. This wasn't seen as oppression. This wasn't understood as cruel. This was seen as honor. It was seen as protection. It was seen as the highest privilege a woman could possibly achieve. The women themselves, they'd been raised from birth to see this cage as a palace. They learned to see their powerlessness as a form of power. They were taught to see their isolation, their separation from the world, as some kind of intimate connection with divinity itself. This is what makes systemic control so insidious, so evil. The victims internalize it. They defend it. They protect the system that's destroying them. They can't even imagine that there could be an alternative, that life could be any other way. For decades, this system worked exactly like it was designed to work. The official Persian records, carved into stone monuments across the empire, they spoke only of order. They spoke of prosperity. They spoke of divine harmony. Everything was perfect. Everything was controlled. Everything was in its right place. And then something went catastrophically wrong. This is where Herodotus comes back into the story. He's writing about 30 years after Xerxes dies. He records an incident that's so disturbing, so horrifying that scholars have spent over 2,000 years debating whether it's actually true, whether he actually witnessed accounts of this, or if it's just propaganda or exaggeration, or even complete fiction. And I want to be clear with you about this. Herodotus was Greek. He was writing for a Greek audience. Those people had every reason in the world to hate Persia, to paint Persian kings as monsters. His account could be propaganda. It could be exaggeration. It could be completely made up. But the details he provides are so specific. They're so psychologically precise, so true to how human beings actually behave and think, that they deserve our serious attention. According to Herodotus, sometime in the late 470s BCE, after Xerxes' disastrous campaign against Greece, after he came home in absolute humiliation, the king developed an obsession. He became obsessed with the wife of his own brother. The brother's name was Mecisteus. This woman, this victim, her name isn't even recorded in history. History didn't bother to preserve it. She's been completely erased. Let's call her what she actually was: a victim. She was married to one of the king's most powerful military commanders, a man who commanded entire armies and governed whole provinces. She was a mother. She was living what you could call a relatively normal life, at least within the strict constraints of royal culture. And Xerxes wanted her. That's the simple truth. Now this is where the story gets really psychologically revealing, where it shows us something deep about who Xerxes was. Because Xerxes didn't just take what he wanted. Remember, he believed he was divine. He believed that everything and everyone on earth existed solely for his pleasure, for his enjoyment. But even with all that conditioning, even after being raised to see himself as a god, some part of him apparently still wanted consent. Some part of him still wanted to be desired, not just obeyed. He wanted her to want him, so he approached her. He made advances. He made promises, and she said no. Think about what that took. This was the most powerful man on earth. He had absolute legal authority to take anything he wanted. He'd executed people for far less than refusing him. And she looked him in the eye and said no. For most men, for almost any other person, that would have been the end of it. Even for most tyrants, there would have been consequences. but the situation would have ended there. He would have accepted it and moved on. But Xerxes wasn't most tyrants. His conditioning, everything his mother had taught him, it had taught him something specific. It had taught him that his desires were cosmic imperatives. They were the will of the universe itself. And resistance to his will, any kind of resistance, that was disorder. That was chaos. That was something broken in the universe that needed to be fixed and corrected. So he didn't give up. He simply shifted his focus. He turned his attention to her daughter. Artainte was probably in her late teens or early 20s. She was Xerxes' own niece. And unlike her mother, she apparently didn't have the strength or perhaps the awareness or the courage to refuse him. The affair began. And here's where it gets even more twisted, even more disturbing. Xerxes had been rejected by the mother. Now he had complete control over the daughter. And some part of him, some dark part, needed to prove that control. He needed to demonstrate his power in a specific way, in a way that would